I never imagined that the day would come when I'd be forced into a role that not only challenged every ounce of my dignity but also reshaped my destiny. I had always believed in loyalty, in the sanctity of our marriage, until my boss, Mr. Calvert, handed me an order so bizarre and humiliating that it shook my very core. "Train your wife," he said with a chilling calm that left me reeling. At first, I assumed it was a misguided attempt at marital counseling, a way to help us rekindle a spark I thought was lost. Little did I know, it was a trap, a sick ploy designed by someone who knew more about the cracks in our marriage than I ever dared to believe. The moment I agreed to this ludicrous request, an uneasy feeling settled deep within me. I had always been a confident man, grounded in my beliefs and principles, yet nothing prepared me for the role of instructor in my own home. My wife, Cassandra, had always been proud, independent, and, if I'm being brutally honest, a little difficult. In hindsight, I should have seen the warning signs, the subtle hints of deceit masked by her charming smiles and pretentious airs. But I was too in love, too blinded by trust, to notice that beneath her polished exterior lurked a calculating woman who had mastered the art of manipulation. The first sessions were almost laughable. I tried to impart basic values of respect and accountability, thinking perhaps she was simply resistant to change. Instead, Cassandra responded with an arrogant mix of sarcasm and dismissiveness. "Is this really necessary?" she scoffed, her tone dripping with disdain. Yet behind that biting retort was something far more sinister, a secret betrayal that I had yet to uncover. I began to suspect that her defiance was not just stubbornness but a deliberate act of provocation, a way to mask a deeper transgression. Mr. Calvert's motivations remained a mystery at first. Was he trying to fix our crumbling union? Or was there an ulterior motive that had me unwittingly caught in a web of deceit? I soon discovered that Cassandra's behavior wasn't isolated to our sessions. Whispers and furtive glances, late-night texts, and unexplained absences slowly pieced together a damning portrait of infidelity. Yet every time I confronted her, Cassandra would smirk and deflect with a masterful blend of charm and contempt. "Maybe you're just too boring to keep my interest," she'd say, her words laced with venom that made my blood boil, though I had no idea how deep her betrayal truly ran. As the days turned into weeks, the training sessions took on a disturbing tone. Mr. Calvert began to show up unexpectedly, observing our interactions with a cold, calculating gaze that unsettled me further. It was during one such visit that I caught a glimpse of the truth, a series of secret messages on Cassandra's phone that hinted at a clandestine liaison. But each time I confronted her, she denied everything with a laugh that echoed in the empty halls of our shared history, leaving me with nothing but a rising fury and a determination to reclaim my honor. Behind my calm, confident facade, a storm was brewing. I realized that Cassandra wasn't just cheating on me, she was playing a dangerous game, pitting my loyalty against her deceit. The more I learned, the more I understood that I had been manipulated by not one, but two figures, my conniving wife and my imperious boss, who had orchestrated this twisted training with a knowledge of her betrayal that cut like a knife. Each day that passed, I found myself plotting silently, the pieces of a meticulously crafted revenge falling into place. I began to study her behavior, cataloging every lie, every dismissive remark, every instance of cold indifference. My confidence grew, bolstered by the realization that I was in control of the narrative, even if the situation had initially been forced upon me. I was no longer the man who had once trusted blindly. I had become a man scorned, determined to exact a vengeance that would leave no doubt about the cost of her betrayal. In my mind, every taunt, every lie was a stepping stone toward retribution, a methodical plan that would soon be put into motion. At the moment I recognized the full extent of Cassandra's deception, the wheels of fate began to turn. The boss's unexpected directive was no mere eccentric demand. It was a calculated move, a test of my resolve and, ultimately, a means to set the stage for a dark, irreversible transformation. I was forced to train her, yes, but in truth, she was training me too, in the fine art of detecting falsehoods, of embracing the cold logic of retribution, and of channeling my wounded pride into a weapon sharper than any I'd ever known. This was only the beginning. The first act of this twisted drama had unfolded, and I was poised to write the next chapters in ink steeped with betrayal and vengeance. I had learned to see Cassandra for who she truly was, a deceitful, arrogant femme fatale who'd taken my trust and spat it out like yesterday's waste. And as I stood there, both mentor and avenger, a chilling clarity washed over me. Revenge was not just an idea, it was inevitable. In the aftermath of that fateful day, when the pieces of my shattered trust began to fall into place, I embarked on a mission of observation and covert investigation. Every interaction with Cassandra now carried a dual significance. Her casual glances and offhand remarks were clues in a puzzle I was determined to solve. I paid close attention to the subtle inflections in her voice, the slight hesitations when she answered questions about her whereabouts, and the way her eyes darted nervously when I mentioned Mr. Calvert's unexpected visits. My mind, once clouded by affection, now operated with a razor-sharp focus, dissecting every word and gesture. Cassandra's act of defiance escalated rapidly. In our so-called training sessions, she evolved from a dismissive participant to an outright provocateur. She began deliberately undermining my every instruction, feigning ignorance of the lessons I was trying to impart, while simultaneously flaunting her cunning disregard for the rules of decency and respect. "You really think you can teach me something I already know?" she sneered one afternoon, her tone thick with condescension. But behind her brazen retorts, I sensed the mounting pressure of a secret too weighty to bear. There was a calculated rhythm to her defiance, a performance meant to conceal her duplicity while casting doubt on my competence. At home, I installed subtle surveillance measures, not out of paranoia, but from a cold resolve to uncover the truth. I hired a discreet investigator, someone with the expertise to trace digital footprints and follow her murky trail of half-truths. Late at night, while Cassandra slept soundly, I would pore over her phone records and computer history, each new discovery fueling the fire of my determination. What I found was as damning as it was elaborate. Messages filled with flirtatious banter, late-night rendezvous arranged in cryptic texts, and even photographs that hinted at clandestine meetings. The evidence was irrefutable. Cassandra was not only cheating, but she was doing so with a calculated audacity that left no room for remorse. As I compiled the damning dossier, I felt an intoxicating mix of righteous indignation and a dark satisfaction that bordered on the clinical. My confidence, once marred by the bitterness of betrayal, now soared with the clarity of purpose. I was no longer merely a victim in a twisted plot. I was the orchestrator of my own redemption. I began to craft a plan, meticulous and unyielding, that would ultimately expose Cassandra's true nature and bring her to her knees. Revenge, I decided, was a delicate art, a dance of patience and precision, where every step was calculated to leave no doubt of my supremacy. One fateful evening, as Cassandra prepared for another one of her provocative training sessions, ostensibly to appease Mr. Calvert, I took a bold step. I invited her to an exclusive dinner at a renowned restaurant, a venue chosen not for its ambience, but for its capacity to serve as the perfect stage for my carefully laid trap. There, under the soft glow of candlelight and the watchful eyes of a few unsuspecting onlookers, I let my carefully rehearsed words slip. I praised her beauty, subtly implying that I was still drawn to her despite everything, all the while probing her for inconsistencies. Cassandra, ever the actress, maintained her composure, deflecting my inquiries with rehearsed charm and a dismissive laugh that barely masked the nervous tremor in her voice. Yet, even as she played her part, I sensed cracks in her facade. She would occasionally glance at her phone, as if expecting a message that would validate her clandestine affair. The tension built with every sip of wine and every carefully measured word exchanged between us. I began to weave a narrative that would unravel her deceit, a story where I feigned ignorance while secretly gathering the final piece of evidence that would expose her to Mr. Calvert and everyone else in our professional circle. My mind raced with ideas of retribution, each more chilling than the last. By the end of the dinner, I had planted a seed of doubt in her mind, a subtle reminder that every lie eventually meets its reckoning. I made sure she understood that the days of her playing me for a fool were numbered. Cassandra's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and indignation as she tried to mask her vulnerability behind a veneer of haughty contempt. The tension between us was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the impending storm. In that moment, I realized that the true battle was not just for my honor, but for the very soul of our crumbling relationship. Cassandra's arrogant dismissal of my concerns, her venomous sarcasm, and her continuous, unapologetic lies were not just a betrayal of our marriage, they were a declaration of war. And I, armed with incontrovertible evidence and a steely resolve, was ready to wage that war with the cold precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. The night ended with no dramatic confrontation, no tearful admissions, just the unspoken understanding that something irreversible had been set in motion. As I watched Cassandra leave, I couldn't help but smile, a smile that held the promise of cold, calculated revenge. The game was afoot, and I was determined to win, no matter the cost. The evidence I had accumulated grew into an arsenal, each message and hidden call a brick in the wall of Cassandra's deception. I now possessed indisputable proof of her betrayal, a digital tapestry of lies and infidelities that I meticulously compiled. Every covert observation, every hushed conversation recorded by my investigator, confirmed that she was not only unfaithful but had taken perverse pleasure in belittling me. Cassandra had the nerve, no, the audacity, to wear her infidelity like a twisted badge of honor, flaunting her clandestine escapades with a smirk that dared me to challenge her. But I was no longer the unsuspecting husband. I was a man awakened to betrayal, armed with damning evidence and a resolve as cold as ice. The turning point came one rainy evening when, after a particularly tense training session at home, I confronted her with a casual remark meant to unnerve her. "I wonder how much longer you can keep up this little charade," I said, my tone deceptively light yet laced with lethal intent. Cassandra's eyes flashed with indignation before she retorted with that familiar sneer, "Oh, spare me your sanctimonious lectures. You always were too simple-minded to see what was happening." Her callous dismissal ignited a spark within me, a spark that quickly blazed into a full-fledged inferno of calculated vengeance. I began to orchestrate my next move with clinical precision. The plan was simple yet ruthless: expose her duplicity to Mr. Calvert and the entire office, strip her of any semblance of respect, and force her to confront the consequences of her actions in a very public arena. It was time to flip the script and turn her own treachery against her. I arranged for an exclusive meeting with Mr. Calvert under the guise of discussing a new business opportunity. In truth, I intended to lay bare the damning dossier I had built, a dossier that detailed every secret rendezvous, every covert text, every whispered promise of betrayal. Before the meeting, I ensured that nothing was left to chance. I made copies of every digital conversation, every time-stamped photograph, every discrete transaction of lies. I even went so far as to recover hidden files from Cassandra's devices with the help of my trusted investigator. It was like unearthing buried treasure, each file a priceless gem of truth that proved her unfaithfulness. I could feel my confidence surging as I watched the evidence stack up, my own private tribunal set to render justice in the court of public opinion. But even as I prepared to unleash my meticulously gathered secrets, another twist unfolded. Cassandra, ever the cunning manipulator, had started to suspect that something was amiss. She began to monitor my activities with a quiet intensity of her own, snooping through my personal effects and questioning my late-night absences with feigned concern. Her arrogance had blinded her to the fact that her own misdeeds were now circling back to haunt her. I realized that she was playing a dangerous double game, one that would soon unravel in the most spectacular fashion. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, the self-proclaimed queen of deceit, now unwittingly stepping into a trap of her own making. My plan wasn't just about public humiliation, it was about reclaiming every shred of dignity I had lost. And as I watched her struggle to maintain her poise, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction settle over me. Cassandra's haughty confidence was crumbling, piece by piece, as the walls of her carefully constructed facade began to collapse. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation. I rehearsed every word I would speak to Mr. Calvert, every detail I would reveal about her treacherous affairs. In my mind, the moment was already unfolding, a dramatic unveiling that would leave Cassandra exposed, vulnerable, and utterly defeated. But the final twist came when I discovered that Mr. Calvert had his own motives, one that had been intertwined with Cassandra's betrayal all along. It appeared that the boss had orchestrated this training not merely as a misguided attempt at salvaging our marriage, but as a calculated maneuver to secure his own position in a web of corporate espionage. His knowledge of her infidelities was no accident. It was a tool, wielded with a precision that made my own quest for revenge seem almost amateurish. This revelation complicated my plans in unexpected ways. I was now entangled in a larger game, one where corporate ambitions and personal vendettas collided. Yet, I refused to be a pawn in someone else's scheme. I recalibrated my strategy, determined to not only expose Cassandra but also to turn Mr. Calvert's machinations against him if necessary. Every betrayal, every act of deceit had led me to this critical juncture, and I was resolved to emerge as the master of my own fate. I watched as Cassandra, unaware of the storm about to break over her, continued her daily charade of smug superiority. Little did she know that the evidence of her infidelity was being woven into a tapestry of retribution, one that would soon shatter the illusions she so desperately clung to. And as I stepped into the darkness of that rainy night, I couldn't help but feel that the final act of this twisted drama was near, a reckoning that would leave no doubt about the cost of her betrayal. I knew that the final act was drawing near, a moment when the scales of betrayal and vengeance would tip irrevocably. After the explosive revelations of my dossier and the looming confrontation with Mr. Calvert, I retreated into a silent planning phase. The pieces were in place, yet the ultimate move required careful orchestration, one that would ensure Cassandra's exposure and her irrevocable undoing. In the quiet hours of a sleepless night, I meticulously reviewed every detail of my plan. Cassandra's arrogance had blinded her to the intricate snare I was setting. I arranged for one final rendezvous at our home, a setting once filled with shared memories but now transformed into a stage for her undoing. I sent her a deliberately casual invitation, a summons cloaked in the guise of reconciliation. Deep down, I knew she wouldn't resist. After all, her own vanity and the thrill of a risky game had long since twisted her judgment. That evening, the house felt ominously still. The usual hum of life was replaced by an eerie quiet that seemed to whisper secrets through the walls. I had prepared every detail, the lights dimmed to cast long shadows, subtle alarms silently activated to record every word, and a hidden camera set to document the unraveling of a deceitful life. I waited in the parlor, every sense alert to the slightest sign of her arrival. When Cassandra finally appeared, she did so with her usual blend of provocative confidence and indifference. Dressed to captivate, she moved through the house with an air of entitlement, as though she were returning to a palace rather than the den of treachery it had become. I greeted her with a cool, measured smile, a smile that concealed the storm raging within me. "Good evening, Cassandra," I said, my voice steady and laced with an unsettling calm. "I'm glad you could join me." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of curiosity and irritation as she took in the transformed setting. "What is all this about?" she asked, her tone mocking yet laced with an undercurrent of uncertainty. "I thought you had moved on, that you'd finally forgotten about all this drama." I led her to the dining room, where the table was set not for a romantic dinner, but for a reckoning. Every piece of evidence, the photos, the texts, the hidden recordings, was waiting in the wings, poised to expose her betrayal to the world. "Tonight," I began, my voice resonating with a cold clarity, "we settle the score. There's no more pretending, no more petty lies. You played a dangerous game, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." For a long moment, Cassandra's mask of haughty composure wavered. Her eyes narrowed, and the familiar spark of defiance flared as she scoffed. "Consequences? You think you have the power to judge me now?" She circled me like a cornered animal, every step a calculated display of her defiance. I remained unmoved. "I've gathered every shred of evidence, every whispered secret that you thought was hidden away. And tonight, I'll let Mr. Calvert hear it all, so that everyone knows the truth about the woman who would sell her loyalty for a cheap thrill." The room seemed to close in around us as the weight of my words sank in, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes, a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability beneath her cruel veneer. Cassandra's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You're insane if you think this will ruin me. I've been careful, and no one will believe your twisted version of events." But I could see the tremor in her tone, the uncertainty that had begun to gnaw at her confidence. In that moment, I realized she had underestimated me for the last time. A sudden knock at the door startled us both. I excused myself briefly to answer it, and when I returned, Mr. Calvert was waiting in the foyer. His expression was inscrutable, a mix of calculated interest and cold satisfaction. "I trust everything is in order," he said, his voice smooth as polished glass. The irony was not lost on me. The man who had set this entire charade in motion now stood ready to witness Cassandra's downfall. With a subtle nod, I acknowledged his presence, each of us playing our part in a drama that had escalated far beyond mere marital discord. We gathered in the main room, a space transformed into a tribunal of betrayal. I methodically unveiled the evidence, one damning piece after another, ensuring that even Cassandra's most skillful denials would crumble under the weight of the truth. Her protests were initially feeble, drowned out by the mounting chorus of incriminating facts. Yet, as the final recordings played, a candid confession of her lies and infidelities, I watched her facade finally shatter. Her eyes widened in a moment of raw panic, and for a heartbeat, she stood utterly exposed. Her admission came not as a desperate plea, but as a brittle whisper of defeat. "All right, you've made your point. she muttered, barely audible. The transformation was complete. The once mocking, haughty woman was now reduced to a trembling shadow of regret. I felt no pity, only a steely resolve and a grim satisfaction that my plan had unfolded exactly as intended. In that charged silence, as Mr. Calvert regarded us with a mixture of vindication and cold calculation, I knew there was no turning back. The path I had chosen was irrevocable, and the final act of my revenge was upon us. Cassandra's betrayal had been laid bare not only to our circle of influential peers, but to herself. The power of the truth, harnessed by my unwavering determination, had rendered her defenseless against the consequences of her own actions. Standing amidst the ruins of our once shared life, I felt a perverse calm. The gathering storm had finally reached its climax, and as I looked at Cassandra's shattered expression, I silently vowed that this night would mark the end of her treacherous games. My revenge had been meticulously planned, coldly executed, and now, with no more masks to hide behind, the true nature of her deceit was exposed for all to see. The fallout from that fateful night of exposure was immediate and brutal. With Cassandra's treacherous secrets now splashed across the boardroom and whispered through the corridors of power, I realized that the real reckoning was only beginning. I returned home that evening with a calm that belied the storm raging within me. I was no longer merely a betrayed husband. I was an executioner poised to finish what had been started. After the public humiliation, Cassandra's confident facade began to crack. I arranged a private meeting in our empty living room, a place that once symbolized shared dreams and now served as the stage for her final undoing. Under the dim light of a single lamp, I confronted her once more. "There's no escaping the truth, Cassandra," I said in a tone so cold it cut sharper than any blade. "Not only have you betrayed me, but you've also played a dangerous game with our lives and reputations." Her reaction was instantaneous, a mix of panic and defiant sneering. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice trembling as much from fear as from anger. "I've built my empire on power and deceit. I can survive a little scandal." But even as she spoke, I saw the panic lurking behind her eyes. Every lie, every calculated smirk, was crumbling under the weight of the irrefutable evidence I now wielded. I revealed the next phase of my plan, a final, devastating twist that would leave no room for redemption. Alongside the damning texts, photos, and recordings of her late-night trysts, I had unearthed a secret that shocked even my hardened soul. Hidden in encrypted files on her computer was proof of her involvement in embezzlement and corporate espionage, a conspiracy she had nurtured in tandem with Mr. Calvert. This was no longer just about our shattered marriage. It was about the absolute annihilation of the false world she had built. As I laid out every piece of evidence on the scarred dining table, Cassandra's eyes widened in disbelief. The woman who had once laughed off my concerns now found herself ensnared in a web of her own making. I can explain," she stuttered, her voice losing its earlier venom. But there was nothing left to explain. Every secret, every betrayal had been captured and catalogued with ruthless precision. I recalled the many nights I had spent poring over her hidden messages, every flirtatious emoji and suggestive photograph now transformed into weapons in my arsenal of retribution. Each piece of evidence was a testament to her betrayal, a brick in the fortress of lies that had finally collapsed around her. "Your empire of deceit is finished," I declared, my voice void of any emotion save for the icy satisfaction of a man who had been wronged beyond repair. With a measured calm, I informed her that I had already sent all the evidence to the authorities and to every influential person in our professional circle. Her secrets were no longer hers to hide. They were public record. The shock in her eyes was momentary before a desperate anger took over, but I remained unmoved. This wasn't just revenge. It was a complete obliteration of the persona she had so carefully constructed. I was erasing her from my life and from the lives of everyone she had deceived. In that silent, charged moment, Cassandra attempted one final gambit, a feeble promise to change, to confess, to beg for forgiveness. But I was past that stage. "Your words mean nothing now," I said, leaning in so close that the chill in my tone was palpable. "You had your chance to come clean. Now, you face the consequences of your actions." There was no dramatic climax, no tearful apologies, only the cold clarity of finality. As she backed away, the weight of her crumbling world pressing in on her, I felt the full gravity of what I had become. I had transformed my anguish into a weapon, my humiliation into an instrument of justice. The path I had chosen was dark and unforgiving, yet in that darkness, I had found a strange liberation. I was not the man who had once believed in blind loyalty or unconditional trust. I was a man reborn in the fires of betrayal, steely, relentless, and utterly unyielding. The final act of her undoing was complete that night. With the authorities already alerted and her network of lies laid bare for all to see, Cassandra had been left with nothing but the bitter taste of her own treachery. I watched her retreat into the shadows of our once shared life, a defeated figure stripped of every pretense of grandeur. In that moment, I embraced the cold truth. Some betrayals demand an end as unforgiving as the sin itself. And so, as the silence of our ruined home settled around me, I stood alone in the aftermath of a meticulously executed vengeance, a man who had taken the reins of his destiny and, in doing so, had rewritten the rules of retribution. In the days following the public unraveling of Cassandra's double life, the air around our ruined home grew thick with the scent of impending retribution. I moved with a calm precision, every step measured as though I were a seasoned warrior heading into his final battle. Cassandra's disgrace had spread like wildfire, yet she clung stubbornly to the illusion of control, desperate to salvage what little remained of her crumbling facade. But I knew that her world, built on lies, deceit, and hubris, was about to end in the most unforgiving way imaginable. Late one night, when the city slept unaware of the storm brewing in our secluded neighborhood, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. I had discovered one last secret, one that would seal her fate irreversibly. Among the digital remnants of her duplicity, hidden in an encrypted folder on a neglected flash drive, was irrefutable evidence linking her not only to extramarital liaisons but to a series of corporate misdeeds that had swindled innocent people out of their savings. The drive was like a ticking time bomb, one that I could now use to ensure that every last vestige of her influence would be obliterated. I confronted Cassandra in our study, a room once filled with whispered dreams now resonating with the echo of impending doom. She lounged on the chaise, her posture as defiant as ever, as if daring fate to make its move. "You look troubled," she purred with that familiar sneer, her voice oily and mocking. But her eyes betrayed a flash of uncertainty. I could tell she sensed the shift, though she refused to admit it, even to herself. I placed the flash drive on the table between us, its presence a silent indictment. "This," I said slowly, letting the weight of my words sink in, "is the final nail in your coffin. It proves everything, your lies, your betrayals, and the crimes that should have been punished long ago." Cassandra's lips twitched, a barely perceptible movement of disbelief and panic. For a moment, the mask of arrogant indifference slipped, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Yet even then, she attempted to deflect. "You're insane," she hissed, leaning forward as if to reclaim some semblance of control. "This is just another one of your pathetic power trips." But I was past the stage of empty threats and petty arguments. I had calculated every risk, every potential twist, and I had prepared contingencies for each one. I calmly explained that I had already arranged for the authorities to receive duplicate copies of the incriminating evidence. I detailed how influential figures in our industry would soon come knocking on her door, demanding answers for her unethical and frankly illegal maneuvers. Her face contorted in a blend of fury and despair as the reality of her situation closed in. The final vestiges of her venomous pride crumbled beneath the cold logic of justice. As Cassandra began to stammer out weak denials, I made my decision. I wasn't content with merely dismantling her reputation. I needed to end her reign of terror once and for all. In the quiet that followed, as she fumbled with futile attempts at redemption, I revealed the ultimate twist. I had secured her complete financial ruin. I'd funneled her ill-gotten gains into accounts that would soon be frozen and seized by the state. In a single stroke, every empire built on deceit would vanish, leaving nothing but the ashes of her former life. Her eyes, once so brimming with arrogance, now widened in sheer terror as she realized the true depth of her downfall. "You're playing with fire," she spat out, her voice breaking for the first time, the bravado completely eroded. "You don't know what you're doing." But I merely smiled, a cold, unfeeling smile that mirrored the chilling resolve in my heart. "On the contrary, Cassandra," I replied, my tone as crisp and unyielding as the winter air outside, "I know exactly what I'm doing. And tonight, there will be no resurrection from this. You chose your path, and now you must bear the full weight of your choices." The final act of retribution was as much an internal catharsis as it was a public execution of justice. In that moment, I embraced the fact that I had not only reclaimed my dignity but had forged a new identity, a man who refused to be betrayed and who met treachery with the icy precision of calculated vengeance. As I turned away from the trembling figure of Cassandra, I could almost hear the shattering of the last fragile remnants of her deception. The door to the study closed with a soft finality, marking the end of an era defined by her lies and my slow, deliberate march toward retribution. In the silent aftermath of that night, as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I realized that while my path to vengeance had been dark and unforgiving, it was also liberating. I was free from the chains of betrayal, free from the false promises of a woman who had deceived me in every conceivable way. With the final act of my revenge complete, I stepped forward into a future where the past would no longer haunt me, a future forged by cold, unwavering resolve. That final night, the night when everything had led inexorably to this moment, I knew there was no escape from the reckoning I had set in motion. The public exposure, the ruined finances, and the systematic dismantling of every lie Cassandra had built her life upon had left her desperate, cowering behind the mask of arrogance she had always worn. Yet, as the hours deepened into a silent, oppressive darkness, I realized that the time for words and deceptions was over. It was time for the ultimate confrontation. I arranged to meet Cassandra one last time at our secluded country estate, a place that, until recently, had been a symbol of our shared dreams and now served as the final stage for her downfall. I had no intention of letting her slip away, no matter how many feigned apologies or last-minute confessions she might muster. I wanted her to face the full weight of her treachery in person, to see the cold, hard consequences of every lie and every betrayal. As I waited in the dimly lit study, a single beam of moonlight cutting through the darkness, I reviewed every detail of our tumultuous past. Each memory of her deceit, every whispered lie, and every callous dismissal of my concerns, played in my mind like a grim tally of offenses. I had become a man transformed by betrayal, a man whose confidence had solidified into an unyielding determination to see justice done, regardless of the cost. When the heavy oak door creaked open, Cassandra entered with a hesitance that was entirely foreign to her usual swagger. Gone was the defiant sneer, replaced by a mask of forced composure. "I'm here," she said, her voice strained as if trying to convince herself more than me. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Instead, I stepped forward and closed the door behind her, sealing off any possible escape. "You always thought you could hide behind your lies, didn't you, Cassandra?" I said, my tone dangerously calm, each word deliberate and laced with icy finality. "You played your part so well until now. But tonight, the truth ends your charade." For a long, charged moment, she said nothing. Then, with a bitter laugh that bordered on hysteria, she spat, "You're insane if you think this is about justice. This is about power, and you never had any right to try and control me, you pathetic fool." The venom in her words was unmistakable, but it only fueled the cold fire in my heart. I motioned for her to sit, though I had no intention of offering comfort or leniency. Every step I took was measured, every glance calculated. I knew that in the depths of her arrogance lay a terror, a fear of the inevitable, the moment when her carefully constructed world would collapse. "Control?" I repeated slowly, tilting my head as I regarded her. "You were never in control, Cassandra. You manipulated everyone, your lovers, your colleagues, even me. And for all your bravado, you were nothing more than a spoiled bitch who thought the rules didn't apply to her." Her eyes flashed with a mixture of fury and something else, panic, perhaps, or regret, before she launched into a barrage of feigned indignation. "You dare speak to me like that? I'm the one who's always been in control," she shrieked, voice cracking under the pressure of her crumbling defiance. But I saw it then, the fissures in her armor, the way her hands trembled as she clutched the fabric of her dress, as if trying to hold on to a semblance of dignity. "You had your chance," I said softly, leaning in so that only she could hear. "You hid behind 1,000 lies, and when the truth finally caught up with you, you ran. I gave you every opportunity to confess, to salvage even a shred of honor. But you refused. You played your last card by hiding your guilt until the very end." Her face contorted in a final burst of desperate rage. "I never wanted this," she snarled, voice low and venomous. "I never wanted you to become this monster." The irony was not lost on me. "Call me what you will, Cassandra, but this isn't about monsters, it's about consequences." Slowly, deliberately, I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket and withdrew a small, cold object. The glint of metal in the faint light was a silent testament to the inevitability of what was about to happen. "You see," I continued, my tone as clinical as a surgeon's, "I prepared for this moment long before you ever thought to betray me. I knew you'd lie, cheat, and hide your guilt until you were trapped in your own web. And now, you've left me no choice. Her eyes widened as the realization dawned, a final, bone-deep fear that eclipsed every previous emotion. Please. I can explain, she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of impending doom. For a brief, agonizing moment, she seemed almost human, vulnerable, broken. But I had long since seen past the mask. Her explanations, like all her apologies before, were just empty words meant to salvage a reputation already in ruins. With a cold clarity that sent shivers down my spine, I advanced. There's nothing left to explain, Cassandra. I took a measured breath and pressed the metal object, a small, sleek pistol, against the back of her trembling hand. You had years to own up to your sins, to confess everything. But you chose to hide, to deceive, to hurt everyone around you. And now, justice demands a price. Time seemed to slow as she looked at me, her eyes filling with a mixture of regret and resignation. I'm sorry, she managed at last, the admission whispered as if it were an afterthought to the enormity of her actions. In that fleeting, shattering moment, her entire defiant persona crumbled into something unrecognizable, a broken, remorseful soul confronting the reality of her own undoing. I didn't hesitate. With the precision of a man who had long prepared for this exact moment, I pulled the trigger. In that instant, all the years of betrayal, every calculated lie, every stolen moment of trust shattered into oblivion. The sound was both final and merciless, echoing in the silent, oppressive room as Cassandra's body slumped, her final confession lingering in the cold air. Standing over her, I felt an overwhelming sense of icy resolve, an acknowledgement that I had reclaimed not only my honor but my very soul from the depths of her treachery. There was no celebration in the act, no triumph in the violence, only a relentless necessity. Justice had been served in the coldest manner imaginable, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any words ever could. I turned away from the lifeless form of the woman who had once been both my tormentor and my downfall. In that final act of retribution, I had not only ended her reign of lies but had irrevocably transformed myself. No longer was I the man who had once trusted blindly. Now, I was the one who held power over my destiny, a man unburdened by the chains of betrayal and free to walk a path defined by the unyielding logic of cold, calculated justice.